Hi everyone, welcome to my sewing and DIY channel. In this video today, I'm going to show you how to sew these super adorable and fun hair scrunchies. There is a flower scrunchie, a star scrunchie, and a heart scrunchie. I'm offering the sewing pattern for making the heart scrunchie as a free download for a limited period. It's a little Valentine's Day gift from me to you. To get the free sewing pattern, all you have to do is follow the link in the description box. And if you think you also want to make the flower scrunchie and the star scrunchie, the sewing patterns for these three designs are actually available as a bundle. And right now I'm offering them at a discounted price with no code needed, considering that I'm actually offering the heart scrunchie as a little freebie. I just want to be able to give you the chance to try sewing one of these statement scrunchies and see if you even like wearing this type of scrunchie before you commit to buying the whole bundle. I don't know if this is something that you find useful. Leave a comment and let me know if this is something you want to see more of in the future. To make these hair scrunchies, you're gonna need some fabric and some fleece. These hair scrunchies are fat quarter friendly, so to make one scrunchie, all you need is a fat quarter worth of fabric or just a quarter yard of fabric. In this video, I'm gonna start off by showing you how to sew the 6-petal flower scrunchie. The construction of the flower scrunchie is very similar to the star scrunchie, so I'm gonna start off by showing you the steps to sewing the flower scrunchie in detail slowly first, and then I'm gonna move on to showing you how to sew the star scrunchie a little bit more quickly. These are the timestamps for this video tutorial. Now let's get started with sewing. So we're gonna start by assembling the sewing pattern for the flower scrunchie. Slice the right border of each page along the gray dotted lines, then join all 3 pages together, making sure that the little gray flowers and pattern lines are lined up. Cut the pattern out along the solid lines, which in this case is basically just a rectangle. Using this rectangle as a guide, cut 2 pieces of your fabric. To give the scrunchie some structure and support, you will also need to cut a piece of fleece for sewing the scrunchie. Next, mark out the dotted stitch line on the wrong side of the fabric. To do this, you can either use a tracing wheel and tracing paper, or cut the pattern along the dotted stitch line and trace the stitch line out with water-soluble fabric marker. Remember that you want to do this on the wrong side of the fabric, and you only need to do this to one of the fabric pieces. Don't forget to also use your scissors to mark the notch on the short ends with the little snip. Now we're going to place the fabric pieces right sides together, then place the fleece material under the 2 fabric layers. Make sure all 3 layers of materials are lined up along the top edge. Pin all the layers in place and sew along the outline of the dotted stitch line. Remember to start and end with a back stitch. When sewing the dips between the petals, you should pivot your work and sew a horizontal stitch across. This allows the fabric between the petals to turn out more neatly later. Next, trim all 3 layers of material along the stitched edge to about 1/8 of an inch. Leave a 3/8 inch seam allowance along the short ends where the notches are. Clip the fabric between the dips as close as you can to the horizontal stitch without actually cutting the stitches. This is a crucial step for allowing the fabric between the petals to turn out nice and neat later. Continue trimming the fleece along the stitched edge. You want to trim the fleece as close to the stitches as you can. And for this step, I find holding the scissors at an angle and sort of shaving the fleece off at an angle works really well. Trim the fleece along the short ends where the notches are. We don't need it when we're sewing this seam later. Next, flip the stitched edge right sides out. If you have done the trimming and the clipping well, you should have a nice row of petals with no fabric puckering between the petals. We're making progress! Now it's time to sew the short ends together. Open up the unstitched edge of your work and place the short ends right sides together with the raw edge aligned. Sew the short ends together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. When you're done, you should have your work joined together as a ring of fabric looking like this. Next, we're going to sew the scrunchie using the burrito method. This can be a little confusing, so I am going to go slow. We're going to start by holding the ring of fabric with both of our hands this way. You'll notice that I'm holding the seam from the previous step in my left hand. Flip the fabric in your left hand so the wrong side of the fabric is accessible. And basically, we're just working with one single layer of fabric here on the left. Next, with your right hand holding the whole right side of the fabric ring, which is 2 layers of fabric, move the right fabric ring to the left, wrapping this right fabric ring inside the left fabric ring in the process. At this stage, the wrong side of the fabric should be facing out and the right fabric ring should be encased within the left fabric ring. The seam from the previous step is a nice landmark for knowing which seams are supposed to go together. Next, sew along the unstitched long edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Start with the back stitch, and as you continue to sew, you will have to pull the part of the fabric ring that is encased inside towards you to make more of the long edge accessible for sewing. Before you start adjusting and pulling the fabric ring, always make sure that you have your needle in the fabric because this helps to prevent your fabric from shifting around the press-a-foot too much and messing up your stitches. Also, when you're sewing this seam right sides together, make sure you're not sewing over the encased part of the fabric ring by mistake. If you're finding it hard to pull the encased part of the fabric ring towards you, try wiggling and pulling the layer outside behind the press-a-foot away from you a little. So continue doing this until you're about 1.5 inches away from your starting point. Backstitch and cut the thread. Now here is where the magic happens. Pull the right side of the magic ring out from the little opening and ta-da! Now we have a fabric ring with the right side out and we're just a couple more steps away from finishing the flower scrunchie. Next, we're going to cut a piece of 7-inch long elastic and use a safety pin to draw it around the inside of the scrunchie through the small opening. When doing this, I also like to place a clip on the other end of the elastic so the other end doesn't get pulled into the scrunchie too easily. When you're done, tie the ends together with about 1 inch left on each end. This makes the finished circumference of the elastic at rest at about 5 inches, and this is a good average size for how the scrunchie is supposed to be worn. So this makes the finished circumference of the hair elastic at rest to be 5 inches, and I think this is like a good average size for most people, but if your hair is thicker, then you might want to consider actually having a bigger finished circumference. I actually have pretty thin and fine hair, and this is just a tad on the larger side for me, but honestly anything that is smaller than 5 inches is just impractical because it is very hard to tie 2 ends of a very short length of elastic together. At the end of the video, I'm going to show you my tips and tricks for wearing this style of hair scrunchie on fine and thin hair. Finally, sew the the opening close. You can choose to do this by machine sewing and sewing very close to the edge, or hand sewing with a ladder stitch for a clean looking finish. Pull the elastic tight so the opening lays flat when you're sewing. When you're done, you're also gonna have to pull the scrunchie in all different directions so the gathers of the fabric will lay evenly all around the ring. The pattern for the star scrunchie are on the same pages as the flower scrunchie. Once you have assembled the pattern, cut the pattern out along the solid lines. Next, cut 2 pieces of your fabric and a piece of fleece. Mark out the dotted stitch line, then use your scissors to mark out the notches on the short ends. Place the fabric pieces right sides together, then place the fleece material under the 2 layers of fabric. Pin all 3 layers together and sew along the outline of the stitch line. Trim the 3 layers of material along the stitched edge to about 1/4 inch. Trim the fleece as close to the stitches as you can. For the star scrunchie, you will have to clip the dips between the arms of the star so they can turn out smooth and neat later. You also want to trim the seam and the points down to 1/8 inch. Next, flip the stitched edge right side out. Place the short ends right sides together with the raw edge aligned. Sew the short ends together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Sew the scrunchie using the burrito method, just like the flower scrunchie. Pull the right side of the fabric ring out from the opening. Draw the elastic around the inside of the scrunchie. Sew the opening close. And you're done. Now let's sew the heart-shaped scrunchie. The sewing pattern for the heart-shaped scrunchie doesn't require assembly because it is all contained in one single page, and that's page 1 of the sewing pattern. Cut the sewing pattern out along the solid line. To make one heart scrunchie, cut 2 pieces of fabric on the fold and 1 piece of fleece on the fold. To make sewing the curves easier, trace the dotted stitch line as indicated on the sewing pattern. You only need to trace the stitch line onto the wrong side of one of the fabric pieces. Next, cut a 1/2 inch wide ring from the center circular cutout of the fleece. With the fabric right sides together, place the fleece under the 2 layers of fabric. Make sure the fabric with the traced stitch line is facing you so you can see it when sewing later. Pin all 3 layers of materials together so they don't shift around when we start sewing in the next step. We want to sew all around the outer edge of the heart shape with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And if you have traced out the stitch line earlier, all you have to do is follow your tracing. When sewing the dip between the curves and the pointed tip at the bottom, make 1 to 2 horizontal stitches. This helps the shape of the heart turn out nice and neat later. Next, trim the seam allowance to about 1/8 to 1/4 inch. Continue to trim the fleece material as close to the stitches as you can. Just like the flower and star scrunchies, I find holding my scissors at an angle and sort of shaving the fleece material close to the stitches helpful. Turn the fabric right sides out and press your scrunchie neatly. Now mark a 3/8 inch seam allowance around the circular cutout in the center. Using a pair of sharp scissors, make short snips of about 1/4 inch long all along the raw edge of the circular cutout in the center. This allows us to turn the seam allowance along this circular seam to the wrong side more easily for sewing. Using your marking as a guide, turn the 3/8 inch seam allowance to the wrong side. Pin the seam allowance in place and sew all around it. You can sew the circular seam in place by hand with the ladder stitch for a clean finish, or edge stitch just like I did for the flower scrunchie in this video. Leave a 1 inch wide opening in this circular seam for inserting the elastic. If you are edge stitching with your sewing machine, you want to backstitch at the beginning and the end so the stitches don't unravel too easily. If you're hand sewing, leave your thread and needle hanging. Don't cut the thread because we're going to continue sewing after inserting the elastic. Now take a piece of 7-inch long elastic and draw it through the opening and all around the scrunchie. When doing this, I also like to place a clip on the other end of the elastic so the other end doesn't get pulled into the scrunchie too easily. When you're done, tie the ends together with about 1 inch on each end. This makes the finished circumference of elastic about 5 inches. Like I said, this is a good average size for a lot of people, but at the end of the video, I'm going to show you my tips and tricks to wearing this type of scrunchie with thin and fine hair like mine. Finally, sew the opening closed. If you were sewing the seam by hand, continue with your needle and thread. If you were sewing the seam by edge stitching with your sewing machine, then continue the same as before, joining the stitches from the previous step. And that's it, you're done! If you have thin, fine hair like me, you might find the scrunchie falling off of your hair a little too easily. And here are some of the things that you can do to make sure that doesn't happen. Number 1, you can make the final circumference of the scrunchie smaller than 5 inches. But honestly, like I mentioned, anything that is shorter than 5 inches is a little impractical because it is just too hard to tie the ends of a super short length of elastic together. Number 2, you can place your hair in a bun, so the volume of hair in which the scrunchie is supposed to wrap around is actually more than the usual volume of hair when your hair is tied in a ponytail. So that way, the scrunchie stays more secured around your hair. Number 3, which is my favorite solution, you can actually beef up the volume of your hair by wearing a scrunchie around your hair first. And because I have black hair, I like to wear my black scrunchie first, and that kind of camouflages it a little and makes it less obvious. And when I do wear the hair scrunchie, I can put these style of scrunchie over my single half ponytail, which is really just a tiny little bit of hair. I can also put it in a little baby bun like this. So I hope you will enjoy sewing these hair scrunchies. Don't forget to tag me in your makes if you're sharing them on your socials as well. Give this video a thumbs up, and I want to show you a little sneak peek of my next sewing pattern design. It is the season of scrunchie in my head. This pattern is going to be called Petite Scrunchie Purse. Look at the bow! Definitely subscribe so you will see that pattern when it comes out. Happy sewing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!